Hello, I'm Melanie Chartoff, and you are listening to my interview with Elaine Goodman on gogoodman.com.au.
You grew up in the 50s. Can you remember what you were watching when you first imagined being in the entertainment industry?
Well, before I thought I was going to be an actress, I thought I was going to be a writer or a comedian. And I used to love to watch Soupy Sales. I don't know if you had him in
Not
Australia.
that I know of.
He was the silliest grown-up man I ever saw. And then sometimes my father would let me stay up till late at night to watch Steve Allen, who was like the Stephen Colbert of our day.
The original Tonight Show.
Brilliant. Yes, that was right. That's right. He had glasses like Stephen Colbert and black hair like Stephen Colbert, and he loved to show off like Stephen Colbert. He loved to sing and write songs and dance and do funny shtick. And he was one of my idols, too. And then Phyllis Diller was one of my idols, and she was on the Ed Sullivan Show, I think. I used to watch her when I was a little girl. And I loved Carole Lombard, who was a movie star. I wanted to be just like her. She was funny and graceful and feminine without demeaning herself or degrading herself. So these were some of my icons that I remember best from watching television in my youth. And, of course, there was the Mickey Mouse Show when I was a teeny little girl.
Did you have friends
I don't think you had that.
We've had Mickey Mouse. I don't know if we had it all the way back then, because we only got TV in 1956. So, and that,
oh my.
That was for the Olympics in Melbourne. So that was our first TV broadcast. So anything before that, we didn't have.
Gosh, well, I really sound old compared to you. I just know a whole history that you're not familiar with.
No, but that's
you're a little familiar with some of my more recent history.
Yeah, a little bit more familiar. So but that's good, because I interviewed Warren Littlefield a couple of weeks ago, who used to be the head of entertainment at NBC, and he.
Yes, of course.
I went through the whole history with him as well, and he grew up watching he saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, and then worked at NBC through the 80s all the way through the 90s, and has this complete history, and still watches TV from all around the world, so he's up with what's going on and what's topical and what kind of genres are popular. So he still loves it.
Well, there's a lot I love, too. I mostly record things. I don't watch very much in real time, so I'm always a day or so behind the curve. But I love to watch Saturday Night Live now. You know, one of my first breaks was
Friday.
After I did some Broadway and theater in New York. There was a show called Fridays, which was the Los Angeles version of Saturday Night Live. And Michael Richards and Larry David and a bunch of us from New York theater were imported to do this show. And we had a real theatrical idea. Real theater is the absurd idea of how we wanted to do it. But ABC wanted us to completely clone Saturday Night Live, come up with characters that would be memorable like theirs. And so we all had to put all our iconoclastic, desires aside and sort of do the template of what was desired. So I was the newscaster on Fridays, imitating my friend Jane Curtin, who I'd run off Broadway with in an improv show. And I felt funny that I couldn't really make it my own. I just basically did jokey news stories as she might have done them. But I finally found my own way. Once ABC trusted all of us, we all were able to create some of our own characters. And I collaborated with Michael Richards a lot. They would throw us into a sandbox and have us create these Battle Boy scenes where he played a little boy that saw his yard as a war field, and I saw our yard as a little romantic place for my Barbie and Ken dolls to have their romantic interludes at picnics. And we would fight it out over these contrasting metaphors for women's lib versus the chauvinistic history. So it was a very ambitious show. And then I moved to Los Angeles. I was no more a New Yorker. I was a Los Angeles person, taking the money, doing as much television as I was invited to do. I was on the Newhart show, which is way before your time. And
believe me, I've got questions. I've got questions.
Oh, okay. Well, you go ahead then. I'll try to answer.
Yep. Slow down, Melanie. Slow down.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know all these names because they all had big careers through the 90s, and that's the amazing thing. Jane Curtin, Michael Richards, Larry David, I know all these names because I grew up with all of them as well in different settings to obviously how you knew them originally. And so from what it sounds like, did you have friends that were interested in TV and comedy? Because it sounds like you were drawn to comedy from the very start.
comedy for many of us was a survival mechanism. You know, if I could make my dad laugh instead of yelling, that was a real triumph in our household. So I definitely had a life force that wanted to be lighthearted and funny and make people laugh. And I worked as a stand-up in New York for a while at the Improv Club, where Freddie Prinze was and Andy Kaufman, and we all hung out together. I was one of the first ingenue stand-up comedians. There weren't very many in those days.
Sorry, what was that word?
Elaine Boozler.
What was that word?
Ingenue.
What does that mean?
An ingenue is a young feminine lead in a play, rather than a kind of a tough guy, you know, character person.
Right.
Ingenue in a musical is like Laurie in Oklahoma, as opposed to Ado Annie, who's the character ingenue.
Okay.
Ingenue generally means the innocent girl.
Yeah, right.
I tried to do stand-up as an innocent girl, which was unusual at the time. Rita Rudner came along years later and became very good at it.
I mean, yeah, I've heard of Rita Rudner. I think I follow her on Twitter. So Roseanne, in comparison, is a bit more of a confident, outgoing kind of character, yeah?
She's a real character, yeah.
Yeah.
But the ingenue is always very feminine and innocent and dainty.
So do you have a comparison to today? Do you have who's the ingenue comedian today?
I don't know. I mean, you know, Amy Schumer can play the ingenue, but God knows she's not. She can play the innocent soubrette, you know, very well. But she uses it for deadly satire, deadly satire. I love her. And I don't know anyone who really plays it as innocently as I had. Yeah. And I would love to know. Maybe you can get back to me about that. There's a lot of incredible female stand-ups today, though. Finally, women are coming into their own. Screw you, Jerry Lewis.
Yeah, no, and it's fine. Like, there's a lot of, we can talk a bit about this later, but just off topic for a second, there's a lot of female comedians that are a bit more risque because that's kind of what the guys do. And maybe that's the way they kind of get a bit more attention before they can go in and do the stuff that they want. They've got to go a bit lower because that's how they get noticed in such a male-dominated industry.
Sad to say, yeah. I mean, I just said screw Jerry Lewis a few moments ago.
Yeah.
I swear to you, Elaine, that's the most obscene thing I've ever said on the air. I'm terribly sorry.
That's all right.
But I tried to be an ingenue, and definitely at my own expense. I mean, I was playing somebody who was very naive about the ways of the world.
But and
it was a satire.
For example, Amy Schumer, I don't really get much into it. Her stand-up is a bit too crude for me, but her movies, I love her movies. When she does interviews, she is amazing in interviews because you don't know what she's going to say. And she's brilliant. She can tell stories and everything, and she's hilarious in interviews and just random. But when her stand-up, I'm not such a big fan of.
I have to say I have not found her able to top some of the sketches that she did on the Inside Amy Schumer show.
Yeah.
The observations and the satires were so brilliant. They made such a great statement without hammering it home. That yes, I have found her specials to be unsavory, frankly. And I agree with you. She's in her films. She's lovable and vulnerable and innocent, and she cries and she moves me, and that's what I prefer.
Now you've done like, I think I know the answer to this. You've done live comedy and comedy through cartoons. When you first got into the industry, did you want to do all types of comedy, or did you want to go and be an actor's actor?
I wanted to be an actor's actor, and I studied with Stella Adler, who was the legendary teacher of my time. She was anti the method, the idea of the method that had been appropriated by other of her peers, like Lee Strasberg and others. And what she taught was what I believe, which is that an actor must imagine lives beyond the limitations of our own. We can't think about our dog being killed when we have to imagine losing a lover in a story. We have to imagine losing that lover, that imaginary lover that we've never known. So I was with her for a number of years, and then I got swept out to television and doing comedy in Los Angeles. But I still do dramatic plays and different sorts of roles as much as I can, because that's what I prefer. In fact, I just wrote, directed, and starred in a film that's kind of pathos-evoking, bittersweet. It does have its quirky comic moments, but it's really a kind of a sad story about a woman in her 70s coming of age in the early 80s and and realizing she doesn't have to be married to her obliviously abusive husband anymore. It's kind of a hashtag them too. It's like the women who were our mothers, what they endured in terms of the culture, and having to put up with being one down to men all the time.
And you sound like you're up with all the current lingo as well, so you could do that in do that in any decade.
Yeah, I mean, but the Me Too movement has brought these sorts of stories to the fore, and everybody has to suddenly watch who they hug and what they say, and I imagine it has to go to quite an extremity before it normalizes and levels out into a playing area where women can feel equal without feeling threatened.
And that's the thing. Like, when I say back in your day, like that's it sounds bad, but like back in your day, like it was known that some actresses did sleep with directors to get parts they wanted, but that may have been their choice to do when they could have said no and walked away from the role. I mean, that was that what was acceptable in Hollywood? Was that known in Hollywood back then? And can it be brought up now as an allegation?
I was very innocent. I didn't know about all that. I'd never had that experience. And so I don't know, maybe it's because I talked so much. It just never was put into a compromising position like that. I thought it was some old wives' tale. But the stories I'm hearing now are shocked by women who are incredibly talented and successful, who were held back by not being compliant for some reason. And I've been shocked, probably as much as you, by these Bill Cosby accusers and Harvey Weinstein and Louis C.K., who I adore,
Kevin
and
Spacey,
Al Franken. I mean, this has been shocking.
Yeah, I
really didn't know about all this.
It's crazy. But how much was, like, on the other side, how much was actually the actress's choice to go along with it? Like, they shouldn't have to walk away from the role, but if that's what it involved, could they have walked away and not gone through that all that stuff? I mean, it sounds bad, but how much choice was the man's and how much choice was the woman's? Like, I don't know. And then there's, like, allegations of just sweeps, like, just touching legs. Like, how far do you want to push it to call it assault? That's the thing. Everything's coming out. So they've got to draw a line with what's actually classified as intentional assault.
And what is mere flirtation? I mean, I was just
what is accidental? What is accidental? If you're just walking past someone and you just bump into their shoulder, like, that's not assault. Like, there's got to be a line somewhere.
There's a very vast spectrum of flirtatious and complimentary behaviors, which are now being seen as assault or demeanment. I don't like, being ogled and objectified, but at the same time, I sure do like being flattered.
Exactly.
I still like it when guys, say sweet things to me. They better not lay their hands on me, but if they say funny things or flirtatious things,
and
I'm all for it.
I called you my second mum in an email.
Oh, you did? That's right. A lot of people do. I mean, I'm flattered by it. Apparently, a character I played was so intimate in people's lives. I was like the babysitter or the voice of the morning. And I'm very kind of thrilled that I had that kind of impact, and a benevolent impact, apparently.
Melanie, we've got to get through this. I've got to go to work in a couple of hours. So.
Oh, I understand.
Like you mentioned, you started in theatre like a lot of performers, so you got a good background in acting and singing, and this would have been in the late 60s, early 70s. When you were in college, was theatre being attended by all people back in those days like it is today? Because I just imagine, like, back then it was people in suits and monocles that went to the theatre like you see in the movies. Like, what was kind of the demographic of theatre back then?
Well, it was pretty white, and people did dress for the theater in those days. They didn't wear floppy shoes and shorts like I do see now. There was a certain decorum. Audiences didn't yell back at the stage or hoot the performers. And it was a different era. I was my college theater critic. I was at a college that was about an hour from New York on the train. So one of the learning curves for me was being able to sit with all the famous critics of the day in the late 60s and early 70s and learn about what made a play work or when a play failed to achieve what should have been its end. And I have to say there were not, beyond Porgy and Bess, which ran at the Metropolitan Opera, there weren't many black-themed productions on Broadway, nor were there very many gay-themed productions on Broadway. And that is quite the opposite now, very different now. And there is theater for all ages, but you do, aside from choosing a lottery cheap ticket, you do have to have the money to pay for it. Broadway, in particular, is very pricey.
And just to backtrack for a minute, when Steve Allen did The Tonight Show, was that in New York or was that in L.A.?
New York.
So did you ever get to go to a filming of that?
No, I was in Connecticut. That's where I am right now. New Haven, Connecticut. I was in plays at Yale University and at Long Wharf Theater, which was our repertory company. But no, I hadn't made it to the Great White Way yet. I think the first Broadway show I saw was a high school field trip, and it was called How Now Dow Jones, and it was about a woman who was the voice of Dow Jones who would announce what the Dow Jones averages were in the NASDAQ each day. And the man she loved told her that when the market hit 1,000, he would marry her. And, of course, it was only in the hundreds back in those days. So she just one morning announced that the market had hit 1,000, and he had to marry her. So it was a musical about that. I thought it was brilliant, wonderful songs. And I was just stunned by it, really smitten by theater. And then I was at a play at Long Wharf Theater when I was a kid, and one of the theater actors walked through the audience and touched my head as he said part of his monologue, and that was another moment where I said, I'm meant to be on the stage. I want to be in the play with him. I want to go right up on that stage right now and create an entire imaginary world to superimpose over the unpleasantness I see around me. So theater was just a wonderful, thrilling, and still is. It's like a drug trip to me. I get swept away.
I love going to the theater. I recently, last year, maybe, towards the end of last year, I saw Aladdin, and that was the best musical I've ever seen.
Oh, was that in Melbourne?
Yeah, in Melbourne, yep. Nice. But School of Rock is coming out soon, too, so I'm looking forward to that. It's one of my favorite movies.
I love the movie. I haven't seen the musical, I have to say. I don't get to New York as much as I would like. But I did see Hamilton.
Yeah? I'm not sure if Hamilton
was everything and more. I had a chip on my shoulder about it, but I have to say I was completely blissed out by it, moved by it. It was an extraordinary production on Broadway, and I hear it is, wherever it is in the world, I hear it's received similarly.
Now, the first TV credit I want to touch on, and if we miss anything in the chronological order, let me know, but I want to touch on, you mentioned Fridays. So from what I read, this was an alternative sketch show to SNL, which you mentioned, on obviously a different day because it's called Fridays, when SNL would have been killing in the very early 80s. You appeared in all 54 episodes alongside some huge names in comedy. You mentioned Michael Richards, Larry David, and there were a lot of cameos as well. I read through the IMDb list. My God, the names. And yes. you also did some impressions for that as well, which you mentioned. Firstly, was it a brave move to try and do what SNL does best, better than SNL? I mean, I know it was on a different day.
It was a very foolish move. That was what I was saying before. I thought it was very foolish. We wanted to do our own thing, but that ABC didn't trust us yet, and they ordained that we should replicate the whole format.
Right, yeah. So that's what happens in Australian TV today. If one TV show gets a dating show, if one TV station gets a dating show, then the other few big main TV stations will all get an adaptation of a dating show. If one does a cooking show, they'll all do different cooking shows. Was that TV?
Well, I don't know. I agree with you that there are a lot of clones or tangential shows that have similar appeal to what's a hit. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. When I was cast on Rugrats, I thought Talking Babies is very similar to a movie I had seen with Bruce Willis as the voice of a baby. It was called Look Who's Talking. You remember this movie? It's way before your time. Look Who's Talking was about babies talking to each other and the parents couldn't hear them.
I've got to see that. Oh, my God.
When Rugrats came on, I thought it was a cheap replicant. But then Rugrats became such an incredible hit, and it had such a bent of its own that people forgot all about Look Who's Talking.
and the question I want to ask about Fridays is, as opposed to comedy through improvisation or stand-up or through original scripts, how much work is it to do impressions? And you mentioned you impersonated Jane Curtin, who I know from Third Rock from the Sun.
I didn't impersonate Jane Curtin at all. I was a newscaster. I was just a conventional newscaster reading jokes like she.
Right. So did you do any impressions as well?
Oh, yeah. I played Nancy Reagan for years. In fact, I was in a comedy album with Rich Little, and I was on Johnny Carson, which was the Tonight Show host of my day. I did Nancy Reagan to his Ronald Reagan one night. And, I played Nancy Reagan in lots of different venues at that time. I also played Rosalind Carter, Jimmy Carter's wife. I also played Jacqueline Kennedy. I also played Jacqueline Smith. I also played Jacqueline Smith, who was also on ABC at that time in Charlie's Angels. They used to make me look like her. And then I played Jacqueline Kennedy. I already said that. But, yeah, I did a lot of impersonations. I also did Jane Pauley, who was the Today Show co-host back in that day.
Yes,
many other people.
Sorry.
So many other people. And then I was able, after ABC trusted us, we were able to create our own characters.
Yes.
I created this little girl, kind of mutant little girl character who used to fight with her brother, Michael Richards. I told you about that in the backyard.
So how hard was it for you to impersonate all these people as opposed to creating your own original material?
Oh, it was easy. I just watched tapes and listened to audio tapes. Very easy, and the wig makers were so extraordinary. They could make you look like Nancy Reagan, I swear.
Now,
look at the wigs on Saturday Night Live too. I mean, a wig does so much for you. You didn't have to do much prosthetics on me to make me look like Nancy Reagan. All I needed was the wig, and I would just put on her red suits, and I would just become her. It was really easy.
I watched a sketch on YouTube that you were in. I'm not sure if it was from Fridays. It was called The Spitter, and it was
Women Who Spit.
Yeah, Women Who Spit. Yes.
Yes, that was a talk show that we did. That was
that Fridays?
About women who that was Fridays. Yes.
Yeah. Oh God, that was so funny. It was just
yes,
strange.
Because we were beginning to break through that feminine, perfect lady image. And do things like men would do, just.
You actually saw the saliva.
Right?
Yeah. It was horrible.
And, we got thrown off the air in several southern states of America because of that sketch. That's how shocking that behavior was for women in those days. And then, of course, Roseanne grabbed her crotch while she was singing the Star-Spangled Banner, and everything went to hell in a handbasket. Oh, no, am I allowed to say hell? Oh, yeah. Now I've said screw and I said hell. I'm so sorry.
You can say whatever you like. This is brilliant.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so now, in the last year of Fridays in 1982, you appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson twice in a year,
yes.
Which is quite an achievement. Once with Gary Shandling and the other time with George Burns. So comedy royalty all round. I think
that was wonderful.
I think the thing that fascinates me about Johnny Carson and his Tonight Show is that whoever appeared on it was instantly a household name, especially comedians. And I feel like back then the big celebrities who appeared on the show were more inaccessible to the general public because there was no social media. So that only contact you had with these movie stars was seeing them on TV. So that may have made it more kind of mystical to the viewer. What do you remember about your two appearances on The Tonight Show?
Well, I remember I had a fleet of my young agents at William Morris with me, and they were like expectant fathers. They were nervous wrecks. The stakes for them were so high that I needed to get away from them to just have a good time. Yes, that was like a major selling tool. Having a client on Carson was a gateway to getting films and other kinds of offers. So I remember their anxiety made it much harder for me than it would have been if I had just hung out on my own.
Right.
And all the young agents enjoyed squiring me over and hanging backstage in the green room and eating the fruit out of my swag, out of my gift basket. And, I had more people to please in my face than just my own self. But I was fortunate. Johnny liked me, and he treated me very well. And it was a relatively easy experience once I got on in the chair hanging with him. It was fun. It was hanging with my agents backstage was a nightmare.
Was Johnny different, like backstage to when he was on air? Did you get to have a word to your agents, or not?
He was sequestered. He was secluded away. I did not see him until I sat in the chair, and then it was like looking at Mount Rushmore.
Mm.
It talked. I mean, it looked like, to me, it looked like a statue I've been looking at for years, and suddenly it talked to me. It said my name. It smiled at me. It was freaky.
It'd be so strange because he's just this character, like someone like a Don Adams that you can't imagine out of character. And the stories that you hear when they're out of character, they're just secluded. They're just not very social people, and maybe that's because they can't be social, or they don't know how to be, or because they're that...
Well, I think Johnny Carson, like many big celebrities, was a bit of an introvert. He preferred being alone. And the stand-up character and the funny character that he created before he came on The Tonight Show became his on The Tonight Show persona. And he just played that persona so well for years. But outside that persona, I think he would relax and protect himself. He just hung with who he chose. Like Frank Sinatra had his brat pack, his guys that he would hang with. And I think Johnny was very similar in that way.
Before we get on to Rugrats, you appeared in 5 episodes of Bob Newhart's show Newhart, as you mentioned, between 1987 and 1990. So all the way through the 80s, you were crossing paths with some of the greatest comedians of all time. Who made the biggest impact on you, or do you remember any experiences that still blow your mind today?
Well, I remember I had a great time working on the Newhart show, and Bob was really good to me. I was everybody's therapist on that show, which made no sense at all. I was Peter Scolari and Julia Duffy's therapist. I was Tom Poston's therapist. I was Mary Fran and Bob Newhart's couples counselor. It was really wonderful. I wasn't very starstruck. Once I got the roles, I felt quite at home hanging with everybody. I did not feel like I was less than, and they didn't make me feel that way. I felt welcomed and very much at home. They were just real people. Get down with it. Play with it. They just loved playing.
Right. Oh, I want to hear the mind blowing. But yeah, I guess when you're in that and it happens, it's happening quite regularly. Like it was for you. Then it just kind of, I don't want to say loses that touch, but it becomes almost normal. Is that what it felt like?
It became so, but I had to put away all the intimidation that I had felt. Before I kind of was recognized as an icon myself, and feel equivalent, feel at home with, feel equal with.
From 19... go on.
I had also been in front of audience most of my life by then. I mean, I had been in front of audience for quite a number of years and a bit of a celebrity myself, so I'd gotten kind of used to it.
From 1990 to 2008, you played the role that I know you for, Didi Pickles, and also Grandma Minka in Rugrats, very Jewish character, which also included 2 movies and was one of my favorite cartoons growing up. What was your initial impression of the show? Now, you mentioned that you'd already seen a movie. I think you said Look Who's Talking was kind of
right.
That the show reminded you of that. And I've watched a couple of old episodes recently. And at my age 27, it's amazing how advanced the idea was for a cartoon of that era. Most of the cartoons around that time were based on kids going to school or just basic monsters. There really wasn't anything as sophisticated in Rugrats in terms of storylines and depth of ideas.
Yeah, you see, when I first read the script, I thought it was very much like Look Who's Talking. But then when I saw it incarnate, when I saw it 1 year later and I saw my voice coming out of this adorable creature, I saw it had a completely different vision. And the animation was so brilliant and expressive, and the storylines were so hip. They didn't seem to be just for children. They seemed to be for a kind of a demographic of sophistication. Parents loved the show as much as their kids and their babies did. It had a double, triple entendre. There was something for everyone in it. And I was thrilled and proud and quite surprised when it became a hit and rerun. I think we only did shows for a couple of years. Then they brought us all back again and as the ratings took off. And then in rerun it became a bigger hit, and they brought us back again. So all told, we only did about 7 seasons of the show, but we did a lot of shows, and we formed a very tight-knit ensemble. And it was just a thrill to work with people like Jack Riley and E.G. Daly, amazing talent, and Chris Cavanaugh, who sadly is no longer with us. It was just a great experience, and doing the films was wonderful, too. You know, I did scenes with Whoopi Goldberg and Bruce Willis in the film. Suddenly all the big stars wanted to be in animation also. They'd realized how much fun it was, and that you didn't have to wear makeup or high heels. So then everybody wanted to do it. It was a really easy way to earn money and use your imagination. And, you know, the aftermarkets were wonderful. Didi Pickles and Minka both have action figures. And Didi did a lot of commercials, like for GM.
Really?
I did a commercial for a station wagon. And, I mean, it was wonderful. I mean, it was beyond just our little studio and our little recording dates. It was big. It was really big. One of the biggest cartoons next to The Simpsons and one of the longest lasting.
And that's funny because it kind of set the tone for this run of 90s cartoons that was just insane. Like the amount of Nickelodeon cartoons that came after Rugrats, and you said that it covered the demographics, and a lot of those Nickelodeon cartoons did that. But Rugrats was the first, and for some reason it tried something and it was a hit.
I know, how lucky. You know, and the only other cartoon I followed as avidly has been South Park, except Rocky and Bullwinkle. There was Rocky and Bullwinkle.
I love that movie.
Rocky and Bullwinkle, and then South Park. Fantastic cartoons. I mean, brilliant writers.
What about like the Flintstones or Looney Tunes or the Jetsons?
Never watched it.
No. Right. Yeah, because
I don't know. Maybe I was not at home. Maybe I wasn't home, or maybe I was doing homework, or maybe I was in a play myself, but I never watched the Flintstones. I don't remember.
Yeah, like even
I did watch
Disney.
Looney Tunes when I was a little girl. I watched Looney Tunes.
Like even Disney, like voiceover work has been around for decades and decades, but as you said, like big celebrities found out about it once. I mean, the 90s hit. Why was that?
Why didn't they participate?
I mean, why didn't they know about voiceover work back in the 60s, 70s?
I think there was a kind of a holier-than-thou attitude that movie stars had about doing voiceover. It was seen to be a come-down or less than. And then somehow it shifted with our hit films, and then everybody wanted to jump aboard. And then there was less room for us, you know, who had been creating it and doing it for a while. I was also on a series called Jumanji, which was based on the film. And I played the aunt, and that only ran for about 2 or 3 years. And, you know, it was when a show became a big hit was when everybody came aboard. I'm not sure there were big stars on The Simpsons the first year or two, but then everybody got involved.
Oh, my God, everybody. Wow.
You know, in England, everybody does everything and did everything. They go from television commercial to a show in the West End to a film, and then go back to commercials again. And nobody had any attitude. It was just and I'm like them. I wanted to be a working actress. I didn't have any judgments. I just so enjoyed pretending that it didn't matter the venue or the size of the audience. I just wanted to be part of as many things as I could, and I still do. I still audition for things.
You want to try everything.
Oh, I do. I love it. I love acting, and I'm writing a lot now. I just have my first book in print, or part of a first book in print, a book called Chicken Soup for the Soul, My Crazy Family. It's one of their most recent editions, and they sell like 150 million of these books, and I'm fortunate enough to be in it with a story about my father, and this just came out on Tuesday, April 10th. Suddenly hit the Amazon bookstores online, and now they have actual Amazon bookstores in Los Angeles and around the country, too. Now that they've eaten all the mom-and-pop stores, Amazon is opening a little neighborhood bookstore, probably in your neighborhood.
I think we've got Amazon online now, so maybe one day.
Yes, maybe you'll have a whole brick-and-mortar store or an Amazon store. But anyway, this is my first book. I also have, I think I mentioned, I wrote, directed, and starred in a movie that's making the rounds now. We'll see what happens with that. And I publish essays in a lot of different publications, locally and nationally and globally. So I just love to keep my hand in using my imagination. It's really been very good to me.
What was your favorite Didi Pickles line? When was the last time you did Didi Pickles' voice? And does it have something to do with Dr. Lipschitz?
Well, actually, somebody asked me if I would record a wedding greeting for their soon-to-be bride. And so I rarely do this, but this young man asked me so politely and longingly that I did do Didi. Just last week, I recorded a message that he helped me write for his bride-to-be. And he can't wait for his wedding. He's going to film her when she hears my voice. So that was a real privilege. I've done a lot of happy birthdays and phone messages, but after a while I had to put a stop to it. I felt like I was just exploiting myself.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it anymore.
Fine. I
I'll
won't.
whip Didi out at parties, give young kids like you a thrill from time to time.
I won't ask you to do it then.
All right, good.
All right.
You can always buy a DVD.
Yeah. It's streaming on Stan, which is like Hulu.
Well,
here.
you can always stream it then.
Yeah, exactly.
Go stream it.
Now, you mentioned Christine Cavanaugh, and I've got a couple of questions about her, who was the original voice of Chuckie Finster, and she had to give up the role after, I think, 1 or 2 years. Her successor...
Well, she was also the voice of Babe in the movies Babe.
And she was the voice of
Babe.
Dexter in Dexter's Laboratory.
Right.
Very
gifted.
Yeah, and her successor was Nancy Cartwright, who obviously is the voice of Bart Simpson. And I interviewed her...
The richest woman in the world that I know, personally.
Really? Yeah. You haven't met Oprah?
Well, maybe next to Oprah, yes.
Yeah.
One down from Oprah.
But yeah, no, I interviewed her a few years ago, and she said it took her about a year to feel comfortable taking over that voice of Chuckie and being confident in it. How long did it take the rest of the cast to get used to having a new Chuckie Finster and being able to work with that? Or did you all record your voices separately?
Well, most of the time the adults did record separately from the kids because we didn't ever hear them, so we didn't need to interact. They would just put the lines together in editing. So we didn't record that often, but I would see Nancy from time to time, and I think we all felt sad mostly about losing Chris. She had an auto accident, I think, and was incapacitated, and recently she's passed. She was the first, and now Jack Riley, who played Stu, has passed, and Grandpa has passed. So, there's a lot of regret and sadness about that, but we'll always have them on their voices on tape and DVD. We kind of keep them immortal in our hearts and minds by getting to listen over and over again.
And what do you remember about her? I mean, she passed away, I think, a few years ago. And she seemed, from what I've read and what I've heard other people say, she seemed like a pretty private person in public, yet her voices are iconic, as we've mentioned. What do you remember about her?
Well, she was shy. I mean, a lot of actors and personalities are introverted, and then they retract the persona that they create to do their work when they're not needing to make a living. And she, like many, kept to herself. But she was an adorable girl. I remember she had cute black hair. She was also an on-camera actress and worked a lot. And she really had that voice, unlike me and some of the other performers on the show. She actually had that voice, that cute little, adorable little voice that she did. It was just really more her. I know E.G. Daly and I affect a voice. But Jack Riley played Stu just like himself. Michael Bell, who played Boris, who was Minka, the grandmother's husband, didn't sound like that at all. He sounds like a normal man, but when he did Boris, he would go like, Minky, what are you doing? What do you think you're doing?
I would hope no one would sound like Boris. No one should ever sound like Boris naturally.
I don't see how anyone could. And then I could do Angelica, too. Stupid babies. So we all got to the point where we could do each other and fill in when we were absent. People were absent, so it was really such a rich and fun experience. I was grateful to be part of it because it was so easy. You didn't have to wear underwear even or, put on makeup or do your hair. You could just come in your scuffies and your pajamas and work. It was so much fun. It was so easy.
And that's the thing. It was a huge sitcom boom in the 90s, but unless you were a kid then, you may not have even, or had kids, you may not have even known about this huge cartoon boom, and people like you were having fully, like, fulfilled careers, but it was as a voiceover actor. You didn't really have to do much physically.
Well, it's still physical, Elaine. Whenever I had to carry a baby, I always had to imagine and use my muscles isometrically to pretend I was carrying the baby. So it's not completely unphysical.
Right.
However, you're just doing a minor version of the strenuousness of those actions. You're not actually having to run. You're running in place. But it doesn't have to look perfect. That's the thing. If you're running on camera, you have to look perfect. But if you're running in the studio, you're just breathing fast and getting out of breath. Much easier.
Now, Rugrats All Grown Up was kind of a reboot of the show, and reboots are now popular. We've seen with Will and Grace is killing it. Roseanne's come back as well. Were you a big supporter of All Grown Up back in 2003 when it was coming back? Well, when it was starting?
I thought it was an interesting idea that the kids were tweens and that Didi had gone into menopause. And so we all did the same voices, only a slight bit lower than before. And yeah, we loved it. It was fine, and it ran a few years. And it because the audience, the youngest audience for that show, had grown up with it. So 10 years later, it was great to have a tween show about tweenagers.
I think it was it Dill or Tommy that they gave purple hair to?
I don't remember. Actually, between you and me, I didn't watch the show. I didn't watch it. I just recorded it.
I preferred the original anyway. It just had a lot more excitement. All Grown Up was too real.
Oh, I see. Too much for you.
I like my imagination. When you think back to that time when Nickelodeon was bringing out classic cartoon after classic cartoon and Rugrats was one of the first, what do you think of? Is Fame in the voice acting sense anyway comparable to Fame in the physical acting sense? I mean, that show also got you an Emmy and a star in the Hollywood Walk of Fame, so it was quite successful.
Which I shared with the other members of the cast, It's a different kind of fame. A lot of people become major stars and then do cartoons, and they use their images to sell the movie, even though only their voices are being used. Back then, we prided ourselves on being anonymous. We didn't want to ruin the illusion of people believing that Didi was actually a creature in the world. And we protected kids from seeing us as real actors. I realized that children, I'm told, believe in Santa Claus, and they believe there's a really animated creature that looks like those creatures until they're about 7 years old. And that's when they start to understand the creation of tangible things that are separate from reality. I remember I was asked to speak at a charity event about doing Didi Pickles, and at one point I did go into the voice of the character, and a little boy raised his hand. He was 4, and I said, "Yes, what is it?" And he said, "How do you color yourself in?" He just couldn't understand how I could be Didi Pickles because we look so dissimilar. And I thought, I'm going to have you talk to the animator about how Didi is colored in. But it was just a phenomenon beyond his understanding. And you know what? He should have had his illusion. It shouldn't have been dissolved so soon. It is fun to really believe that these creatures exist in the world.
You should have said a lot of hair gel and a lot of orange spray.
Yeah, a lot of spray. They did make me up for some party once to look like her. And it was kind of thrilling because as years went by, the character started to be drawn more and more like me. My mouth moves, my forehead. And so I wore glasses, and I wore a red wig and a pink dress and big earrings. And I began to feel like her and talk like her for an hour. I got paid a lot of money to do this convention at Nickelodeon in Florida. It was really a kick. And the little girl left her mother and ran over to me and grabbed my skirts, and she didn't want to go back to her mother.
Aww.
And I said, "Honey, I'm not really Didi Pickles."
Oh, no.
You are. And I had to say, "No, honey, I'm not. There is no Didi Pickles in real life." She was distraught, and I thought, "Oh, what have I done? This is just a terrible, terrible thing."
Oh, I mean, when you think about it, the hair was quite similar to Krusty the Clown. It was the same hairstyle.
Oh, really? Oh, I don't know.
No, yeah, right.
That's not my fault.
Yeah, no, that's not your fault at all. I mean, it was a completely different character, just same hairstyle and a bit different color.
Right.
But you had such an impact. That's amazing. And away from acting, you have your own business called Charismatizing, and you provide improvising seminars to actors and non-actors to help them come out of their shell. At what stage?
Yes.
At what stage did you become confident in passing on your knowledge to other people?
Oh, well, I started teaching improv when I was in college. I was a drama major, and our teacher was an alcoholic, our acting teacher, and she didn't come into class. And I was reading Viola Spolin's great book, Improv, for the theater in those days. So I just started teaching an improv class, and I've never stopped. I think it's an incredible tool for any human being who wants to have a fuller life, and not just for actors and performers. So I've been a confident teacher for quite a long time.
Okay.
And I Skype with people. I teach charisma on Skype with people all over the world. I've taught politicians, priests, therapists, talk show hosts, journalists, and authors who write their book in a state of introspection and then suddenly have to go out and sell it. And they have to do book talks, and they're terrified. So I work with them on how to walk, what to wear, how to speak, how to pre-write their soundbite answers so that they're not saying every 2 seconds on the air.
Yeah, no, so I did.
This is something I've been doing for a long time.
I did Toastmasters for 3 years to get rid of the ums and ahs, and then I recently did I did an improv class, so I did 2 terms of that just to try something a little bit different because it's completely opposite to Toastmasters in that Toastmasters is 100% structured, whereas improv is just get rid of all the rules and just it's basically going back to drama class for a couple of hours a week, and it was fun.
Yes,
and it just lets you relax.
It's fun. I think it's so therapeutic.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. I had a really good teacher as well. The book that you just released, is it a book or is it a chapter in a different book? The one you said you wrote about your father?
Yes, that's a chapter in the famous Chicken Soup for the Soul series. There are a series of books here in America, anyway, called Chicken Soup for the Soul, and every year they have a new edition, and this year's edition is called My Crazy Family. And I wrote a piece about my dad for the book, which just came out the other day.
And do they have...
So I've been doing a lot of book signings for charity in Los Angeles, and I'll do some here in Connecticut, too.
So do they bring out a different book every year with a different theme, and then they get people to write a range of chapters?
And I've been invited to contribute to the next one, too. So I'm thrilled to be a part of that family.
Right. So did they contact you?
No, I just submitted something, but now they're inviting me to participate in future editions, which is a thrill.
Right. Okay. Now... This is one of my final questions, and it's a bit more broader. I know we only touched on a small portion of your career during this interview, so I want to finish on this. I want to know what kind of person you are. Do you still have an affection for those classic 90s cartoons and the people in their late 20s and early 30s like me that grew up with them? Do you still get nostalgic thinking back to working with some of the greatest names in comedy and appearing on Johnny Carson? And do you find it difficult balancing that nostalgia that so many people love and cherish and focusing on the present and looking forward to new projects? Because there are people that aren't nostalgic.
I think you're answering the whole question yourself.
There are people that aren't nostalgic at all and only focus on the present, but then you look at the convention circuit and Comic-Cons and there's people that love nostalgia and that's how they make their living. What kind of person are you?
Well, I haven't been invited to do any of those conventions, and I'm not sure if Rugrats has done any of them. But I'd be happy to participate if there were a convention that involved characters of mine from the past.
Is there a part of you that is nostalgic?
I think it's selling out personally, in a way. Selling out to that fandom that has no life of its own and wants to make their lives connect in reflected glory to yours in some way. To me, I don't think it's completely healthy, but I also haven't participated in it.
Yeah. I mean,
There's a hunger and a need. There's a kind of a hunger and a need in it that scares me a little bit, and it makes me feel like kids should have their own lives and their own pride and focus on their own creativity rather than feeding off of ours and seeing relics of our handwriting or pieces of our clothing as something to be cherished and worshipped. I don't know. It's a little uneasy an area for me.
So for like people like
But
me,
if it were a charity thing, if it were a charity thing to raise money for something, I would probably sell out and do it.
but like for people like me doing an interview like this, when you're going through different stories from your career and your childhood and what you're doing today, and we've covered a range of things, is that kind of that part that looks back, that likes to look back on your different experiences and who you've worked with and the fun that you've had, is that a part of your life that you enjoy? Looking back a little bit sometimes?
I don't reflect back that much until I'm talking to someone like you, actually. I'm just excited about the next thing and the new thing that I'm doing.
Yeah.
I also have a very full life. I just got married for the first time a few years ago,
Wow.
and now I have 2 stepkids, and I have a whole new life. My husband and I travel together, and he's in my improv classes in Los Angeles, and life is just so wonderful that I don't necessarily miss the past. I am still having a heyday, if only in my own mind.
That's cool.
And having a good time and making a good living.
So what credits have you got coming on?
Yes, it's fun to reflect with you.
Are you still acting, or are you focusing more on teaching improv?
Oh no, I act. I told you I just did a feature film.
Yep.
I wrote, directed, and starred in a feature film, and I audition for pieces from time to time. I just auditioned for Transparent, the new version, and for My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. So I am still in the game. I have an agent and a manager, and I can be reached through my website, MelanieChartoff.com, if anybody's interested in bringing me in.
Melanie, it's been so much fun, and yeah, so I've got to get to work, but yeah, no, and you've got to get back to your mother. So
Mom.
Thank you so much for doing the interview.
Okay, thanks so much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.